The crowd let out an enthusiastic roar, a booming sound that had echoed through the venue many times before, where fortunes were made and lost. I saw fleeting gods, both Roman and foreign, Hercules or Heracles, the patron god of gladiators, would appear, as would Minerva, Bellona, Mars, Pluto, and many more, Isis and Mithra, the latter being the soldier's god. They would walk and speak with their chosen before disappearing, faint memories of their beloved. I sat high above in the seating reserved for women. While I traveled down to get closer, my eyes always focused on the small figures below, who began their deadly dance. I could smell the blood and sweat from below, the memories flooding back, the sand, sweat, and faded perfumes from others seated close to me. I never forgot the excitement of seeing the games for the first time. It came in a wave, a flood of emotion, and the lust for competitive bloodshed was ready to be unleashed. Fresh sand was brought in to cover the blood spilt over the ground. The few bodies were dragged away, and dancers spread out. Cries of vendors who walked through the crowd, selling snacks and coin, were exchanged. I heard young couples flirt around me, meeting in hidden places, and wondered how many lovers would meet here. Imperial slaves would toss loaves of bread to the crowd as the celebrations continued. Occasionally, a fight would break out in the audience, and the victor would secure their peace. It is difficult to imagine the games began as a sincere religious ceremony long before our time, a funerary rite of the Etruscans. The Colosseum was started by Vespasian and finished by his heir, Titus. It is the zenith of what the empire offered. I looked into the imperial box and saw the elites speaking among themselves, their lives utterly foreign to me. While my mortal family was high-ranked, we weren't quite that prominent. There had been days and days filled with games, and there had been favor with the population, with bribery, the infamous bread and circuses. All were to support one Caesar's candidate, bound to whoever was permitted an imperial decree to put forward games. The last event of the day, after all the animal matches in the morning, the prisoner executions at midday, and all the earlier matches, we finally had what we had all been waiting for, the Primus. Who would be the true champion? The excitement had been building for a substantial amount of time. The day and night cycle is an eternal repetition, destined to continue endlessly. Multiple pairs, the Primus match of many long years, appeared as shadows only to withdraw. However, my eye was drawn to two of them. The two men in the center of the sand-filled arena raised their weapons, taking a chance of glory. Triumphus, a Thracian both in origin and gladiator style, a champion with many victories under his belt, and Marcus, beloved of Mars, a heavily armored Murmillo, the newcomer, the upstart, popular with the masses, and styled like the Roman legion. This was the final match I saw when I breathed mortal air, and before the gods decided it was not my fate to die. The Colosseum had been finished for a couple of years, a gift from Caesar to the people. I remembered hearing the chatter around me, different languages, mainly Latin, which took me back to my youth, and the smell of precursors to fast food in the air. Thus far, the crowd had been favorable to those who had performed worthy. The audience would morph between the vicious, blood-drenched crowd and the compassionate one. All the people in the crowd resembled Janus, two faces, one in each direction, as they served their grim purpose, cheering for one to live, mercy shown, or for another to die. A memory of a broken past and shattered future. I couldn't hear what the two gladiators were saying to each other. I knew them both enough to know they enjoyed the dance. Each one would get the upper hand. However, this time, As near always, Marcus was defeated, on his back, pleading with 2 fingers for mercy from Caesar. I couldn't remember which one it was. They were shadows acting out a role. I'm unsure they knew what was happening around them. Mercy was granted, and the gladiators were permitted to live, much to the crowd's pleasure. Gladiators were expensive, and years of training went into them. And yet, many still died from their injuries. I sat on one of the ruined stone seats, one of the few that remained. In a modern world, much of the structure lay in ruins, like the rest of the relics from ancient times. My chin on my hand, and my elbows rested on my knees. I knew the imagery would fade, and the truth would be revealed. The world faded when the dream world waned and reality set in. The Roman Empire had long fallen, and the Colosseum had been abandoned. Throughout history, it was dangerous at night time, with cutthroats, street walkers, and pimps patrolling for anyone they could exploit, even a mortal. It was unwise to be out. I could still be overpowered or physically hurt. In the 17th century, I walked out onto where the sands used to be. Technically, I was under it, where the gladiators and slaves were kept in the dark of night. The roof of the structure had been destroyed long ago. I reached with my palms up to take in the power of the night sky. Later, I saw the bombs and the horrors of modern warfare. Like a soft dream, it returned to me, and the dulled stars in the sky continued to glow. The pollution from the cars and factories had forever changed the sky beyond repair, yet the modern sky rolled away, and the naked sky was able to breathe once more. The contemporary world never lasted long. I felt a presence behind me.
I remember you. You were there during my final fight.
The familiar voice came. I opened my eyes to see Triumphus, one of the last gladiators I saw before I perished, and the spell had been cast over the most significant arena. He was semi-transparent, still with blood on his body, but otherwise, he looked the same as he did in life, his dark brow line wrinkled, and he looked down at my clothing skeptically, and I knew he was thinking how my attire was out of place. Modern jeans, running shoes, and a casual top, leggings, the clothing of the barbarians. Certainly not what a young woman would wear. I know my clothing was different before, vibrant and veiled. I could move on from the Colosseum while he was stuck. Around us, I heard the dead circling, whispering, and living their undead lives without a care. Men, women, and children walked past, speaking in all the different languages of the Empire. Some drifted through us, ignoring us, while others circled around. "When do you fight again?" He beamed, pleased, and his eyes lit up at the prospect.
Soon. I'm to fight against all my adversaries and my brothers. I don't think I could have ended on a worthier note.
Their names were countless, nor did he have any grudge for dying. It was part of it.
Why do you keep returning here? You're not bound here as we are.
He answered, his sickle, a curved blade hanging over his shoulder, and his round shield resting on his knees.
I've seen you leave, and...
His hand reached out to touch me, then withdrew sharply, as though burnt by some unseen force, and he checks his fingertips to ensure they aren't scorched by a flame.
You're not dead, and not immortal either. What are you?
Before I could answer, he studied my face.
You are not a war goddess, nor a goddess of death.
I knew this already. He was unaware of the concept of Christian heaven, believing it to be a Jewish heresy. The idea of hell was even more modern. If it had have been given to him, he would have rejected it in distaste, and considered it to be a falsehood. The preparations for the next day's fight were being conducted. Slaves were dragging props, lists of who would be fighting were put up, and all this occurred around us.
I can see why you keep coming back here. I love being in the arena. I can't imagine being anywhere else.
He was in a strange purgatory and enjoyed it. His afterlife consisted of feasting, battling his brothers, and spending time with his fans from all ranks. Ghosts of patrician women walked past with lust in their eyes, vials of gladiator sweat and blood around their necks, and they barely noticed me. Their focus on whichever gladiator caught their eye. Marcus, his final and prime opponent, stepped forward. They rested their hand on each other's shoulders and prepared for a match that would continue, without end. Both of them survived initially, only to die from infection later on. Not that either of them remembered now.
Well met, brother.
Marcus greeted. They disappeared, an arm around each other's shoulders. The world faded back. My attire transformed once more. My dress reached my ankles, and I felt relaxed in the change. Back to normal. I hadn't seen my reflection, but I noticed how people would dip their heads in respect before continuing about their day, and I observed the gathering of gladiators. I didn't recall seeing Marcus or Triumphus. In the distance I saw many others, such as Fortunus, Flamea, the infamous rivals Piscus and Verus, and other heroes of the arena, names recorded for all time and forgotten. Even those who had never fought inside its walls were drawn to it. Some of them held their weaponry or walked with their families. I recognized the other heroes, men and the few women who walked through. The screams of those who were to be executed rang out loudly and were ignored by the other ghosts. I too paid them no attention. On the walls were pamphlets of which gladiators were being featured. Some were withered and old, while some were replaced for an eternity. A small child handed me a pamphlet, only for it to disappear into ash in my hands. The ashes rose up from them. I heard the gladiatorial collegia come and take the dead, prepare them for burial, and guide them on their journey. However, all who died here would linger forever. Were you ever freed?
Yes, but I want to keep fighting.
They entered the fighting sands. They paraded around in a circle, weapons raised at the crowd, and receiving enthusiastic cries in response. The crowds appeared and faded out, lingering and hoping.
Perhaps the gods will bless me this round.
Or not.
Gladius met Sicca, and the cloud roared its approval of the bloodshed.
Perhaps Mars loves me instead.
Never, brother. Hercules, perhaps.
They bantered together. And now, with reality falling back, I could stand and listen to their conversation. They ignored me, focused on the performance. A clash of weapons against each other, clanging loudly with the audience's roar. Around Marcus's neck, I saw a talisman of his old gods, nameless to the Romans, and yet the impact is known forever. Triumphus' sword swung out, dangerously close to Marcus's neck. It sliced the necklace and the idol cracked. The crowd screamed in approval. It had fallen to the ground, and it whittled down into nothingness over time, soon becoming part of the sand, and finally the dirt. The traces of it were enough for the god to lay claim, and keep people in a spiral. Piscus and Verus, eternal rivals. The pair who had been freed returned. Each held their rudius, the wooden sword of freedom, and somehow they found themselves back here once more. Two gladiatrixes, Amazonia and Aquila, one bare-chested and the other armored, performed. They shouted loudly, the sound of weapons clashing against each other, and I could hear eyeless senators talk about which they would purchase for an evening. It wasn't the first time a gladiator was caught in the bed of a senator's daughter, wife, or his own bed. I remembered seeing these two perform, and the whispers of noble daughters wishing to take part. There were some who did. Mevia, a venator, one who battled animals with a spear, was bare-chested and muscular. "Why do you keep coming back here?" Mevia hissed, still coated in the blood of a lion. It trickled down her bare breasts and she grinned at me. White teeth contrasted with her darker skin tone, and I had to tilt my chin to look her in the eye. A leopard's pelt was draped over her back for the excitement of the Roman crowd. Before I could answer, she soon faded, and the structure altered too long after her time. I saw the building being used as a fortress, and later, it was used as a quarry. While there were ghosts from this period, my favorites were the ones from the Golden Era. In the dark, I went up to the ruined seating and gazed out, preparing myself for a night of viewing, where the Imperial box should have been. In this dreamlike state, it was restored, and I saw countless Caesars and those who were well connected there, each standing, unaware that death had claimed them. And I always sought out the talisman that caused all this to happen. For hundreds of years, it still eluded me. I saw visions of the construction. Her reasons for doing this were unknown, as it was planted deep in the earth. Time was fluid. I heard foreign fauna crying out and screaming far from home, forced to die to demonstrate Roman might over nature.
Why do you still linger here?
Marcus asked, still marked from his injuries and limping.
You can go free whenever you want. You weren't impacted by the spell.
His appearance changed. Soon the limp was gone, and then it returned, and he didn't appear to suffer when it occurred. The pair of us watching the executions that would constantly tug at my heart, people being let out in chains, some pulling against their bonds, and others resigned to their fates, branded on their foreheads for their crimes, F for fugitives, and later, ghosts appeared with it on their forearm or calf. These ones were always the most difficult to speak with. They were too caught up in their final terrified memories. They didn't see anyone. Merely an echo, a shadow, depending on what they were called. I heard the screaming of Christians being thrown inside, or other prisoners who had broken the law, either divine or man-made. It is difficult to say, either to be killed by damnatio ad bestias, or through beasts. They were chained to wooden stumps, barely able to move as the Barbary lions and other ferocious beasts from far across the empire, who were brought forward from strange lands, sickly and unwell, frightened by the ever-ravenous crowds. They often failed to kill right away. Their maimed victims pulled them close, to expose their own throats, to quicken a merciful death. Once they had awoken in hell, and endless suffering without traveling to the afterlife, these ghosts were always too caught up to speak with me. Other contenders were brought forth to battle the beasts. These ones had weapons, armor, and even training. If they survived, they'd be able to advance through the ranks.
I've always wanted to fight the beasts, not as prestigious, plus an animal can't be bribed to take a fall.
Marcus joked, now appearing behind me, while Triumphus left to go wherever he went.
I've always wanted to fight a lion. I wonder what it would have been like.
He mused, when his thoughts were disturbed by loud, frightened screeching.
Let me go!
Titus kept screaming to escape and would be made an example to Rome's people. Those who did not follow Rome's orders would suffer greatly. Titus didn't experience the horror of being decimated by the rest of his legion. He was taken to Rome to be made an example of a power struggle between two men, two Caesars vying for power. His full name was forgotten, and the prestige of his name now denied to him. Damnatio memoriae, committed both in life and death, his memory destroyed.
It's not my fault I obey my commanders!
His frantic cries fell on deaf ears. No matter who he looked at, no one offered their hand to support him.
Please! I was following orders! I'm not a traitor! I was sent to deliver a message! I'm loyal to Rome!
He cried out. Two faceless guards dragged him out. Silent and deadly as they did so, the pair had forgotten their names, their families, and their connections. All that mattered was their grim task. They never responded to pleas or curses. Their sole being was a purpose. Their existence, solely a purpose, was perhaps their version of hell. Do you know him?
No,
His voice trailed off. Is he a Christian?
I don't know. He said sacrifices to different gods. I think I was the one who killed him. I can't remember them anymore. There are so many.
He commented, his voice casual. Does he remember you?
No, I don't think so.
Do you remember what legion was decimated? Which Caesar punished him? I asked curiously. Not everything had been recorded. Marcus lifted his shoulders casually, unaware and unwilling to worry about something that was no longer a concern. His life was the arena. Anything outside was of no importance to him. 2 nameless gladiators stood prepared for their match. A Samnite stood with his sword, large visored helmet, an oblong shield, and a retiara stood, lightly armed with a net, trident and dagger. I wished I could recall their names, but they were lost, even to them. Some had vivid memories of their old lives, while others' minds were utterly blank. Their lives began and ended in the arena. Time was fluid, the imagery passed. The sound of rushing water filled my ears. I remember this spectacle, where naval battles were performed, and the crowd was filled with awe. I didn't know how much it would cost me to remain here. One night, I went home and found myself aging too well. Or rather, not at all. No sign of age on my skin. No matter how many long years passed, and I never waned. I asked priestesses of different gods for assistance and answers, pleading with ritualistic sacrifice, and I was marked as a messenger, a guide. My task was left entirely to me, and most souls were too concerned with their final day. The talisman, once found, would be the source of their liberation, but I couldn't find it. I saw the great naval battles before me, watching in the crowd as many walked through the water, unaware of this additional layer of purgatory. There was a gap briefly, and the ruined structure came into view. I could see many tourists from people both inside the former empire and beyond its borders. Locals, who once brought emperors and popes high, only to tear them down, were dressed in costume while guilt-tripping tourists. I felt it calling to me, luring me toward the small artifact, and I dug deep into the earth with my hands. I was close, so close, and right when I was about to lift it up, a ghostly hand grasped my wrist and pulled me up. I looked over my shoulder to see Triumphus' face.
I can't let you do it, my friend. If it disappears, where do we go? This is home. The chaos, the pain, it is what keeps us alive.
He began, loosening his grip but still holding it.
You can leave and find peace with your God while we have nothing. Do not deny us our peace, our chance at life.
It is a curse, you...
To you, it is. For us, it is life and a blessing. Don't take it away from us.
Why don't you want it to end?
Before this life, I had and was nothing. My parents debated selling me into slavery to afford bread for my older siblings. I would have lived a short, sad, sorry life while in the arena. But I became Triumphus, a hero. My name is remembered, and it hasn't been forgotten.
I could have pushed him away, ignored him, and carried on while whispering words that would render him powerless. However, Triumphus was a friend, and I couldn't dismiss him. I nodded, inclined my head, and kept an eye on where the object remained. The next time it moved again, when I saw a figure walking through the crowd. It lingered in one spot or another, and seemed to feed on each spirit it stopped by. It was the first time I saw it. I walked past a crowd of laughing watchers, only for the crude spirit of a man yelling at me for blocking his view of the games. A child asked me if I knew Verus or Marcus, waving a wooden toy armed with a small, equally wooden sword. It turned to look at me, and vivid yellow eyes focused on me. I felt a sharp, biting chill. I knew whatever it was, it had to have answers for me. The outline was of a shadow figure, pitch black at the center, and faded out at the edges. Perhaps a woman, or a priest in a robe that concealed their body. "Who are you?" I called out. It turned to look at me. Again. And I felt my heart tighten in fear. It raised its hand to the sky, curling long, twisted fingers. Before the entity answered me, the cycle was beginning again. And with the sun's rising light, it faded. Triumphus was drawn back into his endless battle with Marcus. A parade of death and bloodshed. This time, there was disorder. Events and timelines no longer made sense. A shattered world. Those trapped were aware now. The illusion broken. The audience's hands went to their dual faces. Each face was in horror, terrified, twisting and pulling on their skin. Beasts, naval battles, and gladiatorial combat all occurred simultaneously. Those who served as symbols had their souls restored, the suffering unyielding, and the building was filled with agony. I could return to the modern world, with all its conveniences, yet for me, this was home. Fleeing, I would have left them to their fate, and potentially allowed more to become trapped inside, something I was adverse to doing. My thoughts were plagued with an unknown guilt, terrified by what was happening. Some of them started screaming, running to the sides, while others continued no matter what was happening, which was uncommon for most. They preferred their delusions. The day cycle drawled on longer than they had previously, with the midday sun fiercely burning down, and I felt my skin burn. A sensation I had not felt since that fateful day.
Do you know what happened?
I looked up and saw Marcus standing there. He was coated in blood with his weapon still in his hand. We were alone. The crowd and other fighters disappeared, and an eerie, unnatural silence filled the air. He stood without the heavy armor on one arm. No, I saw a spirit, a phantasma, a being of the Eterna Nox. Did you see anything? He gave a thoughtful look, taking in the question, and nodded grimly.
I've heard whispers, a shadow moving and feasting on us. It can manipulate time and suffering to receive the optimal amount of food. Its presence is so great that even the ghosts never visit us. They're all petrified of something in the unknown.
I talked to Triumphus, but he didn't want me to destroy the idol, so he stopped me.
It wasn't born of the idol, I don't think.
Marcus reflected, slowly sighing and looking toward the sands.
I need to go. My fight is to begin. Triumphus is waiting for me.
I watched when he went down. The crowd started to drift back into the sands, jostling to get the best seat prescribed by their station in life. The senatorial class toward the front, the lower-ranked people going upward, and I walked down a little further. A couple of courtesans sat with their clients, each waiting, and I tried to look for the spirit among the crowd. I searched all the faces, some blurred, and others filled with excitement. I gazed down at the arena. Marcus and Triumphus had begun their dance of death. Gladius met Seeker, sword against sword, and their shields collided with each other with great force, shoving each other back. I noticed neither of them jested this time, and the banter had disappeared. A feeling of cold determination took over me, and I began to feel a sense of dread. An ominous feeling loomed on the horizon, and the result wouldn't be the norm. The attacks weren't the flamboyant moves of a showman providing entertainment. but two grim murderers ready to execute their opponents. I looked up at the Imperial box, where the faceless elites waited surrounded by grandeur, the insignia of their office pronounced, and they too eagerly waited. Triumphus sliced through Marcus' skin and kicked him to the ground, and one of them had been defeated like normal. Marcus raised two fingers, a missio, aimed at the air. Half the crowd chanted for his demise, while the other desired for him to live, and the dual faces of the crowd switched interchangeably. Marcus's life hung in the balance. It didn't feel right. I ran down the steps, leapt onto the sands from a great distance, and ran toward the two men I had known quite well. Marcus held his stomach. His blood dribbled down on either side onto the sand, and he shakily kept his hand in the air, asking for mercy.
Triumphus, stop. It's not supposed to go this way.
He murmured. Finally, through the helmet's face guard, I saw fear in his eyes for the first time. Marcus lifted the helmet up, exposing his face, and I saw blood in his mouth. I looked over, and Triumphus approached with his seeker in his hand. Fortunately, the sword was short and gave me time. Triumphus still wore his helmet. It concealed his face, and he had an unnatural feel to him. He didn't move like he normally did. It all felt wrong. Triumphus, lift up your helmet, I whispered. I could have sworn I saw the flash of a smile. And finally, his hands lifted it off. His eyes were pitch black, swollen as the spirit had taken hold of him and forever changed the dynamic. It smiled while wearing his skin, the smile too high and wide to be human. Who are you? I asked it, knowing its attention was now on me.
The shadow and the doom. Umbra et mors. The shadow ends death. I've gone by many names.
The voice was a painful growl, difficult to bear to be around, and I felt it gripping my entire body. Why are you here? You don't belong here, I demanded, fearing the answer. I heard the frustrated cries from the crowd, a blur of commands that whirled into one sound. It let out a loud, mocking laughter, and I stepped between Marcus and whoever this imposter was. I squealed when Triumphus' body effortlessly moved through mine.
You are mine.
It leered down at him with a menacing stare, reached out, and forcefully tore Marcus' helmet off and hurled it far behind him. The entity drew out Marcus' life force from his open mouth, and I stood frozen, unable to stop what was happening. This was no ordinary death. It felt wrong. Glowing orbs emanated from Marcus' mouth. Unable to resist, I could see him slowly fading away. The otherworldly claiming was unnatural. The ethereal glow grew intense, shining brightly. As the final strand of life ebbed away, the brightest spark of vitality flickered out of existence. At that moment, I knew that Marcus, who had lived an undead life, had ceased to be. The stillness that followed was palpable, a poignant reminder of the fleeting nature of existence. The Seeker brutally cut along Marcus' throat, slicing so deep it nearly beheaded him. Amid the crowd, some people pleaded for mercy. They expressed their dissatisfaction by screaming and booing. Caesar shouted angrily from the Imperial box after being openly defied. Many souls screamed in outrage inside his body. Two guards ran toward Triumphus and jumped back in fear when they saw his face for the first time. The visitor, unnatural and wicked, brought feelings of terror. Marcus's corpse remained where it was. There was no slow fade for it to be reconstructed like the norm, and it simply remained in place. A loud cracking echoed through the arena. His corpse turned to stone and began to break apart. The crowd had never seen anything like this, and they knew that they, too, were under threat. Instantly, panic set in. They screamed and ran for the exits that circled them back inside the building. An endless loop of fear. There was no resetting of the day, and the pattern was broken for the first time. The frightened people kept running back and forth in their attempt to escape, until some of them blamed the elites for what happened. They shouted and pointed to the Imperial box, jumping over the barricade and pushing each other to the ground. "No! Stop! It isn't them!" I called out, and my words did nothing to stop them. Either they didn't hear me, or they didn't care. The guards slew them, using spears and shields to push them back before they were overrun. Their rage was endless, crushing them, and they pulled the guards apart. The Caesars, multiple ones, were crushed. The caricatures, made up of many Caesars, all rolled into being, and their lifeless form lay beside their family. Their remains endured the same treatment as Marcus's body, turned to stone and crumbled apart, the final remains in place. It didn't change anything. For the first time, those who were slain were killed and didn't rejuvenate.
Marcus, no. What have I done?
Triumphus screamed loudly, leaning down and trying to lift the remains of his battle brother, only for them to fall through his hands. I looked at his face, and his eyes returned to his mortal ones. Relief filled me, but the lingering question remained. Where was the entity? And worse, who was it occupying? I searched the panicking crowd. Even the gladiators and venators were trying to escape the chaos, all to find safety. They came up from the bottom to the higher levels, breaking the order of the arena, and I could hear nothing but loud shouting throughout. My hands reached out, trying to stop them, and a small crowd moved through me. The chill of their bodies winded me. I closed my eyes, and my breath was sucked out of me. I hunched over, my arms protecting my body, and I tried to find somewhere I could hide. I found a spot between the stairs and behind a cart, and slid in between watching the chaos unfold. The dead were now experiencing a more permanent death. I didn't know what would happen now. I only wanted to escape, and perhaps find a solution from the outside. I didn't wish to test the strength of my immortality. The audience continued their foolhardy attempts to escape, crowding around the exits and constantly being turned back, the cycle repeating. I looked down to the area where the broken idol had been. If I could find it and destroy it, the spell would be broken, and I'd put an end to this, even if it meant I finally died. I could hear long, depraved screams of pure terror. The entity began to claim more victims, and I covered my ears with my hands, trying to block out the sounds that still managed to penetrate my ears. The entity moved from one host to another, not letting people know who had become the host as it fed on their chaos and fear. I saw family and friends turn on each other in an attempt to save themselves. Both the crowd and gladiators alike. It turned into a bloodbath, combined with people fleeing to save themselves. I closed my eyes, trying to keep the horror out while the carnage continued. I could hear people being stabbed, slashed, and bludgeoned. Every way a person could be killed. I could smell fire and hesitantly opened my eyes. Smoke with stone corpses littered the ground, frozen how they perished, in pain and fear. Slowly I stood and walked through the destruction. The silence passed over the arena. No matter where I looked, there was death. I walked down the stairs to get a better view. I had never seen so much death before. I hoped one of them survived. I looked through the sands, and bodies were littered throughout. Men, women, and children of all ages and social classes. I couldn't tell who they were anymore. I walked through and stepped over multiple bodies. I headed toward the exit, and even the outside was frozen. The modern world had come to a standstill. Without waiting, my pace quickened, and I ran toward the exit, only to be pushed back. "No," I murmured, trapped with the entity, and jumped when I heard footsteps behind me. With a turn of my head, I saw Triumphus standing here, his shoulders slumped and his face forlorn. I searched his face for any sign of the entity, and all I found was guilt.
I never thought I'd actually kill him once we realized we were here.
Triumphus reflected remorsefully. "Don't worry about that now. Do you know where the idol is? I found it and Marcus wouldn't let me destroy it." I stepped closer, placing my hand on his to insist my point, and studied his face.
If it stops, won't the entity be free to roam?
The possibility was a terrifying one. The guilt of condemning the human race, which was oblivious to the terrors that lurked. It is better to have the option than not. I pointed toward the lower part of the arena. The structure lingered in the past, without the threat of the modern timeline returning to destroy it. And together we ran through, past the cages that stored deceased beasts and gladiators, all gone, having slain each other.
I've never seen so much death.
He said, lifting a gladius from the sand and handing me one. I awkwardly held it, having never carried a weapon in my life, and figured I might have to use it on him if he was possessed again.
They're all gone. I never thought this would happen. I thought we would be here for all time. I know many people didn't want to be here, and they were stuck. It was home for me. Seeing it like this is horrifying.
I crept through the various gates, ensuring we weren't being followed, when I heard Triumphus behind me.
I can't sense it. We should be safe.
How do you know it won't try again?
Once it left my body, it couldn't return.
He pondered, shrugged his large shoulders, and he tried to consider why.
Maybe because he didn't kill me. I don't think it can survive inside a dying body.
I didn't answer him. I didn't know what to say. I just let him speak.
I can still feel it inside me, twisting my body. I can still see Marcus's eyes and all the others I killed afterwards. Perhaps they are in a better place now.
He reflected, the pair of us trying not to make noise along the sand. And finally, I found the place where it had been hidden. Unfortunately, it was in an open area where we could easily be seen. Without choice, I snuck towards it and dug my hands into the earth, drawn in by an unseen force. The atmosphere around us suddenly changed, as a chilling, otherworldly whisper filled the air. The darkness began to encroach, engulfing everything in its path. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, as I felt an eerie presence close by. Triumphus stood with his gladius ready, and I was unsure what he planned to do with it, considering it was another world and not mortal flesh.
Find it. I'll protect you.
I dug frantically through the dirt. My pace quickened with the urgency, and I ignored the pain when my fingernails ripped off. Triumphus' shadow lingered over me, and yet I was unsure where the noise was coming from.
You will never find it.
The demonic voice rang out, and I kept digging through. I found it and held it in my hand, this time not stopped by anyone. I beamed, grabbed it, and held it between myself and the living darkness that circled me. It rang out with loud, mocking laughter.
And what do you intend to do with it? I doubt you have the ability to drive me away.
It said, taking a physical form with a humanoid shape, viewing me with glowing eyes, and in its form, I could see the screaming, trapped faces of all the victims it claimed during the course of its life. People from the earliest of society sprang out. Some were more terrified. Triumphus stepped between us.
I'll give you the time you need.
He slashed the gladius at the demon, and it let out a roar of indignation. The entity reached into his chest and swiftly drew out his life force. It wasted no time. I could feel the idol against my fingertips, but it was wedged in. Soon, the husk of Triumphus was all that remained. I looked at his broken body lying on the ground, and the realization of my isolation filled me. I was the last one left, the sole survivor. I felt its hands around my throat. The entity invaded my body and began to seize control. My heart rate was quick, and I gasped endlessly for breath. Something slowed it down. Memories flooded back to the fateful day I witnessed it. Wait, I was the one who was trapped here, I murmured. I was a priestess, a vestal, respected, and my presence could free those from enslavement if they crossed my path. My flame kept the entity at bay. It wasn't the idol that stopped it. My body sharply jerked from one side to another, moving against my will, and I fell to my knees. The gladius sliced into them, and I knew it was time. My blood stained the sands, and I knew it must be done. I picked it up, holding it, as the entity forced me to crawl through the sand toward the exit. Outside, I no longer saw the historical world of what used to be. Instead, I saw modern Italy, the tourists of modern life, people walking through in their contemporary clothing, artificial lights, cars, and everything I was never supposed to see. It was all before my time, a world I should never have been exposed to. I lifted the gladius, and the entity realized what I was doing. It tried to escape my body, pulling and twisting my soul and mind. My skin bubbled, pulling and lifting up. Large burning boils appeared on my skin, trying to burst yet failing. Desperately, I kept it inside me. My body twisted, all my limbs turning in inhumane angles. Still, I held it inside me.
Let me out! Let me out!
It demanded, finally knowing fear for the first time. I could feel it tearing inside me, twisting and pulling. I remember you from back then, I whispered, battling it inside my mind. It ripped through my memories, and the truth was finally revealed. I remember how you fed, drawn in by all the pain and suffering in one location. You were going to feast until the world was no more. I remembered seeing them here. Once my prayers to Vesta were given, a new life was offered, and my memory was removed from me. Deals were made with other gods, and I remembered feeling stuck before being able to pass through the gates, allowing me to leave at any time.
They are mine. They all belong to me.
It bellowed, angry and enraged at my unwillingness to comply. My grip on the gladius tightened. I knelt and aimed it up toward my stomach and leaned down onto it, wincing as it pierced my flesh, causing me to bleed. I didn't die right away. It tried to get me to crawl toward the exit, and it began to lose power with every step. Spirits pulled themselves out, ripping my flesh in the process, and I winced, wishing for death. It crawled through my spine, akin to lifting itself off the ground, and I whimpered, barely able to contain it. Marcus and Triumphus stood, now free, and Triumphus leaned down to take the gladiators from my hand. Triumphus' showman's side had passed, and now a grim determination appeared on his face.
Again, brother.
Again,
They nodded to each other.
we will not let you leave.
Marcus promised, and then the pair began to cut down the now physical form of their adversary. They made gashing, slicing wounds to prolong its suffering, and more of the stolen souls burst out violently with every stab wound. They appeared, surrounding us as the being lost its power, and I could tell by the accents that time was moving backwards. Those with weapons started to strike into the wicked being. Apart and separate, with each strike, the entity lost all power. With a final strike, it uttered a loud, horrifying scream and disappeared. All of its victims stood surrounding me, now free, yet their souls were forever scarred by the experience. I was still bleeding out. I coughed up blood and gazed at them while they all disappeared. My friends smiled before they died, and I felt my life slip by. Now exposed to so many beliefs, I wondered where I would go. I rested my face on the surface of the sand and felt my life leave me. With a sharp breath, I was back inside the arena once more. It was the same day. The entity, the phantasma, destroyed all, and I observed the change. There were no dual spirits. Everyone had their humanity intact, and I smiled, cheered with the rest when the match began, before I noticed that no one could leave. The entrances were blocked. Those who tried to leave were pushed back inside to continue the cycle. We were stuck here. I hope you enjoy this story. What did you think of it? Let me know what you thought in the comments section down below. Don't forget to stab the like button, subscribe, hit the bell and leave a comment. This video is made with the support of my incredible channel members, Patreon subscribers, and all my viewers. Thank you so much for supporting me. Don't forget to check out my social media accounts below, including my merch. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you.